Come along with us back to Okolona today, where we start our day at the spot where General Nathan Bedford Forrest hit the Union rear and attempted to turn their flank. Let's go explore. I find the sign to be really accurate, so I think I'll just read it to you. In this vicinity on February 22nd, 1864, Benjamin Grierson ordered McGrill's Federal Brigade into a line of battle opposite Colonel Bartow's Confederate Brigade of 4th Cavalry Corps. Bartow's men from the ridge east of the railroad advanced as the Federal line began to retire in column. Seizing the opportunity, Forrest charged across the prairie and struck the Union column in the rear and on both flanks. As one regiment after another collapsed, Grierson's withdrawal turned into a rout. This sign is located a little north of town, out close to the highway. Now I want you to use your imagination as we look to the east and pretend that we're one of the Yankee cavalrymen as we see Forrest charging across this prairie toward us. When seeing Forrest charging across the prairie, the Union cavalry would have turned much like we are now and started falling back in this direction. At about that time, Forrest hit him in the rear and on both sides, just like the sign said, and they started fleeing back toward the Pontotoc Road. The Pontotoc Road, which you'll see in a few minutes, is just a couple miles that direction, which is west of here. A view from a little different direction where Forrest led Bartow's men to strike the fleeing Federals. Since we parked here right beside the Okolona College site, let's take a second and look at it. The sign says Dr. Wallace A. Battle founded the school in 1902, but Brandon Beck in his book says Dr. William Battle founded the college in 1902. Nonetheless, Dr. Battle founded Okolona College, and it was incredibly important to education of African American students through high school and provided what we would call industrial training for young adults. The school closed in 1965. As we leave the Okolona College sign, we head back toward town just a short bit, and we turn right up this field road. You are headed in the same direction that General Forrest led Colonel Bartow's men as they charged toward McCrillis's 3rd Brigade. We're heading up toward an old baseball field, and when we get to a good spot out to the right of the picture here, we'll pull up along the fence and we'll look out into the field where most of the fighting took place. This field before you is where the two cavalry forces, or rather where General Forrest's cavalry struck the Union cavalry in the rear. At this point, he had the skier on. You're looking back toward Okolona College and back up the field road that we just came down. Forrest charged from that direction, and the Union ran back that direction. This home is called the Elliott Donaldson House, or Bowood. It was built in 1850. It's just a short distance back up Church Street toward town from the field road we were just on. On February 23rd or so, Colonel Jeffrey Forrest's body was brought back here, where it remained until funeral arrangements could be made. Colonel Forrest's funeral was held in Aberdeen, the home of his fiancée or wife. I'm not sure if they were ever actually married. I can't find any documentation of that. I wish someone could provide me some. At any rate, General Forrest was brought back here after the Battle of Tupelo, or the Battle of Harrisburg, whichever you want to call it. He convalesced in this home after being injured at the Battle of Harrisburg and he was joined here by Mrs. Forrest. It looks like at one time the home was being restored, but I'm not sure what's really going on here now. At any rate, General Forrest would recognize the appearance of its exterior. We're heading back toward the cemetery now, and we'll take a quick stop at the Gilliam Carruthers house. During the Civil War, a Presbyterian church stood on this site, and it served, of course, as a hospital during the war. There are also wartime graves in the backyard. The stained glass windows in the house are from that Presbyterian church. I guess, like a lot of structures in Okolona, this home was also a wartime hospital. It's known as the Knox Fitzgerald House. We've made our way to Oddfellows Cemetery to visit the graves of two guys that are important to Okolona's history and, well, Mississippi's as well. If you remember the unusual clock on the side of the bank in part 1 of the campaign for Okolona, you'll remember a guy named General William F. Tucker, where this is General Tucker's grave. Tucker was from North Carolina, but when he came to Mississippi, he made a town called Houston his home. Houston is on the other side of Chickasaw County. Tucker's always been associated with the Chickasaw Guards and also the 41st Mississippi Infantry. During the war, Tucker enjoyed the reputation of an incredible fighter. He fought in the Battle of Chickamauga, the Atlanta campaign in 1864, where he was wounded in his right arm but refused to allow the doctors to amputate. He survived the war only to be murdered in his own house in Okolona in 1881. As we leave the grave of General Tucker, we're going to turn and find the grave of Colonel James Gordon. Colonel Gordon has incredibly interesting history. Gordon raised and armed and equipped Mississippi's first Confederate cavalry company at his own expense, something around $32,000. It became part of the 2nd Mississippi. While Colonel Gordon can't claim to have ridden with General Forrest, he can claim to have ridden with General Earl Van Dorn at Holly Springs. Also, late in the war, President Davis sent Gordon to England to try to purchase a privateer. According to local folktales, Colonel Gordon made a couple trips to Canada during the Civil War. He was part of a group of men who planned ways to finance the Confederacy's efforts to establish relationships with England or to conspire to inflict damage on the United States. Perhaps this Colonel Gordon is the reason that John Wilkes Booth is buried in Guntown, Mississippi. That's, of course, another local folktale, but if you'll do the Google and Google John Wilkes Booth, Guntown, Mississippi, you can find the story and a photo of his grave there. Nonetheless, Gordon led quite an interesting and influential life. We have left Oddfellows Cemetery and all thoughts of conspiracy and whether or not Colonel Gordon played a part in bringing John Wilkes Booth back to Northeast Mississippi after the Civil War. We're now at the site of the Okolona Confederate Hospital. This was the largest of the Okolona hospitals, and it stood at this wooded lot that you see before you. Nobody seems to be real sure when the Federals burned this hospital. It could have been in 1862, but I think more likely 1864. This is the home of the Ligon Boatman House. It was built around 1896. There are graves of Union soldiers on its property. As you make your way into the Okolona Confederate Cemetery, you find this marker that lets you know that Okolona was founded in 1840 as Rose Hill. Rose Hill was renamed Okolona in 1850 after a Chickasaw Indian brave. When you come into the cemetery, you're struck by, or at least I'm struck by, the fact that this is a Confederate cemetery, so exquisitely laid out, much like you would some national cemetery. In fact, the only other Confederate cemetery I've ever been to is the one at Carnton, which of course is part of the Battle of Franklin. This is the grave of the Reverend James Haygood. He was a Presbyterian minister. One corner of the Confederate cemetery has an incredible row of flags. They're flags from each state that has a Confederate soldier buried here. The state of Texas has 49 soldiers buried here. The state of Tennessee, 34. South Carolina, 11. North Carolina, 1. Missouri has 7. There are also 318 unknown Confederate soldiers buried here. At the base of each flagpole is a little cast iron plate with the name of the state, or in this case, unknown, and how many soldiers are represented in the cemetery. The state of Mississippi has 74 soldiers buried here. Louisiana, 57, Kentucky, 12, Georgia, 5, Florida, 1, Arkansas, 101, and the state of Alabama has 115 Confederate soldiers buried here. The cemetery makes it real easy for you to find your specific soldier here. We'll look for B. Bishop, Company E, 40th Mississippi Infantry. He's on row 1 and should be the 4th grave from the right to the left. You just simply walk from the big sign where we were just a second ago, and you walk down toward the highway. Row 1 is, of course, closest to the highway. It's kind of interesting, to me anyway, to walk by these graves and see all the different places and the different names that these boys, sons, fathers, all these Confederate soldiers, where they came from. We've made our way to row 1, and we'll take a few steps to the right, and at grave number 4, we should find B. Bishop. I think this is a pretty good place to end part 2 of the campaign for Okolona. Big Daddy and I hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've learned something, and we invite you to come see it for yourself sometime. Thank you.